Hello, my name is Robert Teaster, and I've been a psychotherapist for over 36 years and also a committed meditator and a meditation teacher for the last 14 years. This is part of a series of talks that I'm giving on the cultivation of wisdom, and this specific talk addresses the topic of masculine psychology. Now, the point of this talk is to help men understand some of the internal issues and structures of their own mind and how they are appearing in the world, and help them understand that they do need to turn the gaze inwardly. Men oftentimes identify themselves by their economic positions in their life, meaning their work identity, and if they're doing well in that, they feel like they're doing okay. There's also the social arenas and then the marital arenas and the family. So today I'm going to just talk briefly about the four archetypes of the masculine, and that's the king, the warrior, the lover, and the magician. Now, these archetypes come out of Jungian psychology, and the work that I'm referring to is Robert Moore's work. He's a Jungian analyst, and in the men's movement he's a primary figure in helping men understand some of the internal structures and some of the issues that they face in our personality structure that we become very identified with. And the point of understanding them is also to question the identification that we have with them, because it's important to not, what Jung would say, constellate into them and become them. You only borrow the archetypal structures. Like the king is a figure historically is somebody that is looking out for his people. A good king does that. We have too much history with bad kings, and they've got a bad reputation. But a king is a person that ultimately, in the purest sense, is able to act in the best interest of others. So if he's the, let's say, a father and has children, he is being a king, and he's acting in the best interest of his family, which means his wife and his children. So that's the psychological boundaries of a king. Now, a king can also have, of course, political office and standing in the community, and that is also being a king, acting in the best interest of the community, acting in the best interest of the state or the union. But this is an archetype, and so we don't assume, that we are the best father just because we have children and have a wife and a family. We have to act in the most noble way, to act in the best interest of others. It's very difficult for a man to do that, because a man is oftentimes quite wounded from his own family of origin. These other archetypes are similar in that they are something that you want to borrow from and try to do your best, but ultimately you need to turn your gaze inwardly. So I'm going to bounce back and forth between the structures, the archetypal structures, and also then the need to turn inwardly, so that a man knows his direction ultimately to go inwardly, let go of the archetypal structures, and turn his gaze inwardly to deal with himself and his emotional wounds that he has, that he carries inside, because that's where you want to heal. So the other structure would be, the first is the king archetype, and oftentimes gets too much attention, and then the second one is the warrior archetype. Now, the warrior archetype can be very tricky for men. It's not really such a great term to use. I don't like using the warrior archetype, because people think the wrong thing when you think of a warrior. We men, of course, have had a long history of being warriors and going into battle and killing people and so forth. So that is only a part of being a warrior, and it is oftentimes inappropriate to constellate in this way. Governments manipulate men typically to become warriors for the state and then send them into battle. Now, that is not necessarily the best identification with a warrior, and here's why. The warrior, really, the best, purest form of a warrior is one that turns his gaze inwardly and is willing and able to do that, and to face his own demons that he has inside, and to try to heal those directly. Now that takes a warrior, because that path is the most difficult one. You can call it a psychological path, emotional path. Ultimately, it's a spiritual path, because it's a spiritual path of awakening. And what that means is that a man's mission in life is to go inwardly and to ultimately open his heart on deeper and wider levels. Now, it takes a warrior to do that, because it's so painful at times. It's so difficult, and men typically don't want to turn their gaze inwardly, so they tend to work harder. They over-identify with being a worker. They can work 40 to 60 hours a week easily, and that is not the correct direction for the purer form of a warrior. A warrior is somebody that can ask for help, so for instance, asking a mentor for help or asking a psychotherapist. And I would recommend men seeking out the help of an initiated man, not just a regular therapist just out of graduate school, but a man that has done his own inner work. So if you're contemplating doing some inner work on yourself, then you would see a man that's been initiated, that has done their own inner work and can act in the best interest of their clients, rather than just repeating the wounded material that they came in with without question. So the king and the warrior are these strong archetypes in the masculine psychology. The lover is the third one that's oftentimes talked about, and we tend to identify with that. Some people identify very strongly with the lover, and that too can be a difficult one to define, because we think of the lover, we think of having sex with a partner. That can be with typically, traditionally, a woman, but also a man as a lover too. If you're a gay man, then you're going to have partners, male partners. Now, that is not really the purest form of a lover. A lover is a supple person that opens his heart. So if you're turning your gaze inwardly, you need the lover aspect to embrace your woundedness. That takes a lot of courage to do that. And that's the lover holding himself rather than getting it projected onto a mate. It's a very big Y in the road, and most people take the traditional road without questioning it. But I want you to listen to this carefully. You can turn left, not right, meaning you can turn your gaze inwardly, and the lover goes inwardly and faces their own deep wounds in deeper and deeper levels, and opens their heart up in a very loving way. Because if you work on your own anguish or your own suffering or your own pain directly, then your heart will open. And that's the key to understanding the turning away from the false archetypes and going towards the pure spiritual form of the archetype. And so the lover springs out of the man dealing with his own emotional pain directly, with the help of a mentor or a psychotherapist or a spiritual teacher. It's typically the most appropriate way for a man, even though men have a very hard time asking for help and getting the help they need. So if a man is actually able to ask for help, that's a significant Y in the road for him. He's willing to go inwardly, and he's starting to think that, okay, a lot of this chaos around me, or a lot of these paths that I've chosen around me, have led to nothing. They've turned empty. If you're out in the outside world and you're just working 60, 80 hours a week, or you're making a bunch of money, or your family is getting dry and empty, and you've gotten a divorce, or you're just hanging in there in a relationship that is dead, you eventually will think about turning inwardly, or you'll think about ending your life in some fashion or another in addictions. So the lover archetype springs forth directly out of inner work, and it is about addressing your own anguish and your own pain that you may have and most likely did inherit from your father. Let me be clear about where this stuff comes from. It is generational. And this talk is not about in any form about blaming, say, the father or your father. It isn't about that. It's about understanding where the wounds are coming from. So modern psychology is evolving in the terms of masculine psychology, and so what we understand now pretty clearly is that the sins of the father, as sometimes it's called, we inherit the wounds of the father. The father wounds his children just like he himself was wounded by his father. And if you're also wounded by your mother, and she was also wounded by her not only mother, but also her father too, just like your father was wounded by his mother and father. And they're different wounds because each of your parents came from a different family and they had a mother and father. So it's not just sex typed, it's traditional family systems that come down to you, and you will get wounded by your mother on the feminine side of you, and you will also get wounded by your father on the masculine side of you. And it isn't about blaming them. If you look into their history, they were wounded by their parents, each from a different set of parents. And that is very different. You see, your mother has a mother and father, and your father has a mother and father, and sometimes, of course, they don't. Sometimes it's a single family. But even if, let's say, the single mother raising her children, she cannot make up for the absent father. Let's say there was a divorce, or he was killed in a war, or just left the family. Then the child, whether it's male or female, will have a father wound, because what that is called is abandonment. Let's say your father's an alcoholic. That's also a form of abandonment, because he is not there for you. He's there for himself. So the archetypes of the lover and the king and the warrior all get affected by this inner wounded material. And then the magician is the last of the archetypes. Now, the magician in traditional predominant culture is somebody who has a certain amount of wisdom cultivated or a certain amount of experience in their jobs or in society, and they become good manipulators. They are not what they present. There's a hidden agenda of some sort, and they typically will want either one of two things. One is power, the other is money from you. So be careful with this magician archetype. This also is a very cluttered and inappropriate archetype to identify with in modern culture. There's nothing wrong with the magician archetype in the spiritual dimension. As you become more developed spiritually, then your magician will become stronger and have deeper and more meaningful insights, and you will be cultivating wisdom. And so you might see, and typically you will see people more clearly. You'll see them manipulate it more clearly, because that's what if you're turning towards society, you will see manipulators more clearly. Now, that's not so pleasant to see, but you can see them operating, and it's sad. It's a sad thing to see people that have consolated, and meaning identified so strongly with an archetype and are projecting it into the world and are stuck in that. That's not where you want to stay. It's not something that you want to become out in the outer world. However, the magician is best in the spiritual dimension, because as you work through your own emotional, psychological, and spiritual issues, then you become a stronger and more developed magician. Now, here's the key part of that. The magician is a very powerful archetype, and it is someone that can actually act in the best interest of their family, act in the best interest of if say you're a healer of some sort, of your medical doctor, or if you're a therapist, or if you're in a position of power in society. Let's say you're the mayor, or you're working on the board of supervisors, or some kind of position like that. Any professional position too, by the way. The magician can be a superb healer because they see through the different masks that people tend to wear. And what we're looking for as professional people, as a therapist, is that there is a beating heart behind the masks. And so you try to peel the masks off of people. And if you're, let's say, a man in therapy, and you have a male therapist, which I, of course, would recommend. I recommend men seeing a male therapist, especially an initiated one. Then what will happen in that session would be that you will start revealing more of your inner hidden self, your real authentic self, in a safe environment where, of course, the therapist will never shame you. That whatever you come up with, which is typically wounded little boy material, that's held in a loving way. And as you breathe into that and hold that in consciousness, it then transforms and matures into upper levels. So in psychotherapy, if you stay with therapy for X number of years, 2, 3, 4, then that's the process of therapy, is opening the heart at deeper levels. Now, what all that means in terms of letting go of the old artificial archetypes and using those archetypes in the realm of development, so that you become a mature man in a mature masculine psychology person. So you're not held back by these wounds, because it's important that you work on these wounds. Otherwise, you will, what Jung said, is constellate, meaning you get frozen into personality structures and you can't get out of them. You're locked into them. And that creates a hopeless feeling inside and helplessness. And you get stuck, and then you get angry. Men get very angry when they get stuck. And so the path of opening back up, what Michael Meade calls going back into the water of life. You go back into the depths and descend from the frozen water to the depths where there's fluid water. And so you have to go back inwardly. It isn't in the outside world. That is just your manifestation. It is much the same as what Joseph Campbell talks about when he collectivized all of the spiritual and psychological myths around the world. And the basic myth is that the man turns inwardly, trying to open his heart back up on whatever spiritual path that he's on. It doesn't matter what it is. He's trying to find his true nature. He's trying to find what's true for him. And what that means, he has to open his heart back up. It's very lonely to live your life with a closed heart. Men run out of juice or energy or water in their later life, like in their midlife. They get stuck in a routine, they get stuck in an institutional framework, and they dry up. And it's harder and harder for them to be creative because creativity comes from an open heart. So you definitely want to get a good therapist or a good mentor or a good spiritual teacher to help you turn your gaze inwardly and start working with this kind of locked up material. The path of the pain that you find as you go inside are your hallmarks. They are there for a reason, and you definitely want to start softening them up. And the way you do that is you hold them in awareness. And then you start breathing into them. And it may cause tears, it may cause you to weep. And if you remember Robert Bly's Iron John myth, he says that men access their feelings through their grief. And that was a central part of the men's movement. And Michael Meade is a significant part of that movement, and you might want to pick up some of his books. So this is the journey that a man must go on if he's going to expand and develop into a mature masculine. It's a difficult path, but it has to be part of your life. It isn't your only part. You can certainly still work, and can certainly have children, have a family and wife and so forth, or not. You can also then choose whether you want to go down the householder path or if you want to deepen your own spiritual practice. It's up to you, but you'll see that you stand at that Y in the road. Scott Peck wrote a book a while back. He says that the book's name was A Road Less Traveled, and that's what he was referring to, was to be on the spiritual path. And there are many spiritual beliefs in all around the globe: Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, so forth and so on. I recommend people to do the meditation paths because they are faster and deeper, and to start your cycles of going on retreat with a good spiritual master. So those tend to pan out faster. I've worked with many clients and I have referred them there, or sometimes they come to see me after going on a few of those. And the material that they come up with is much deeper and clearer. And of course, I've been on that path for many years and did make it across to where I finished that kind of work up. So that was a helpful thing for me, and that's where I speak from, is not just reading this out of a book. I am grounded in that material and in that realization. They're called levels of realization in that world. And there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to that. And you end up in self-realization and clarity, and creativity is all part of that. The mystery comes back into your life. The water of your life is flowing and moving, and you're in the front row seat, in a sense, of the roller coaster when you're in the moment, fully in the moment, as many spiritual teachers talk about directly. So that's what they're saying, is that you're driving your own life and unfolding with the broader picture, which is life itself, and that you are unfolding with it directly. And that's a very exciting thing to do, but you have to go inwardly to do that. You can't just decide that you're going to do that, because everyone has these wounds inside. Men have difficulty working with this emotional stuff. So they have to unconstellate, because it isn't the intellect. It's not about getting degrees in college, and it isn't about getting title, professor or a doctor, or, an engineer and so forth. That isn't the spiritual path. That's not where you definitely want to hang your hat. If you're doing that, then you definitely want to go on a spiritual path to go directly to what wakes you up. So the roadway in the spiritual dimension unfolds mostly in the two areas of the intuition and feelings. And now men have a hard time with both of those. Oftentimes the women have stronger intuition and feeling states, and they cry frequently, and it's okay with them. But men have a hard time with that. So that's why I recommend that if a man is wanting to turn inwardly, that you get a good male therapist that has done their own work. Because you're going to go into some of this sadness and some of the grief and pain that you have inside, and that is what opens that back up. It isn't that you can turn around, jump over it, or turn to the left or right. Most people that don't do inner work are going actually sideways. They're not going forward. They're going sideways because they can't hurdle this area. And if you can't hurdle this material, this inner material, you're going to get stuck, and you're going to become very unhappy. And you're not going to be a happy person anymore. You do remember when you were younger that you were happy. So it's the intuition and it's the feelings in the spiritual dimension, and that goes towards the heart, and you breathe into the heart, and oftentimes weep through whatever material you come with. And it's very true, basically, that you're going back in years. So if you're in therapy, say, for X number of years, let's say the second or third year, you're going to be going back through adolescence, going back into 7-year-old material, 6-year-old material, 5, 4, and if you're stayed with therapy long enough, you're going to go into early childhood. And the wounds that most of us carry, and the depth psychology agrees with this, most of the wounds come out of 0 to 5. And we tend to act them out over and over again. So if you can stay on the bucking bronco in therapy for 2 to 3 years, you're going to get into that kind of material, and you're going to start I'm going to use that metaphor again, the bucking bronco, because if you're weeping through this material, eventually the horse stops bucking, and what's left is a good horse to ride. And that means, metaphorically, that you got rid of most of that material, and you're back in your body more deeply than you ever have been, and you're ending up being the person that you really wanted to be. So that's why you want to do that. Even though it might be difficult and expensive, you will become more an authentic person. And it's a very real thing. As a therapist for over 36 years, I have seen this over and over and over with my clients, and I've certainly done this inner work myself. So it's what I'm speaking is true. It might be difficult for you to pursue it. Usually people hear these kinds of talks and then they just drop them and they don't follow up on them. But the point of the talk today is to help you understand that this is so important. Creativity is dependent on that. Clear insights into life, it depends on this kind of work, so that you see politicians lying to you. You see how the government spins the truth. You see how the multinationals try to get you to buy things, and they tell you, look, if you should buy my car, and you have a beautiful woman next to you. You know, this is nonsense. This is not the path of enlightenment. It is not the path of awakening. It is not the path of insight. It is not the path of creativity. So if you want to have your creativity back, if you're an artist, if you're a teacher, if you're a professional person, even if you're just somebody who doesn't really care, you just care about yourself, that's plenty of reason to go inwardly. When Jesus did his work, he ended up being a carpenter. That's fine. See, you don't have to really do anything with your awakening. You can keep that to yourself and just be pretty happy about seeing everything that you see. And follow through. The follow-through changes dramatically where you can finally do that. If you get stuck, you can't follow through. You'll start on something, and then you'll go to the left or right, and that's called going sideways. So the point of the talk is to get you to think about your journey and this inner work that is so important, and most men just simply don't do it. And if you want to, if I'm talking to you and I'm trying to appeal to the warrior in you, that you think you're more important enough to do your own inner work, and that you feel like maybe you can do it. And oftentimes in doing inner work, you feel like such a little kid that you feel, no, this is too much for me. I'm overwhelmed and I don't feel like, why me? Why I can't do it? Yeah, I don't have to do it, and I'll go work 60 hours a week and make a lot of money, and then buy toys. Well, that's not going to help for very long, and then it just puts you in debt, and the toys break and they get old, and just like you. So we're on we come into this world for a purpose, and this is the purpose for men. This is what you must do. The kind of work, it's inner work, and once you start balancing this inner work, and that it takes center stage in a sense that it's more important than in the rest of this stuff, you'll see that everything else comes into line and balances, and you become more creative and more happy and more in your body, definitely back in your body, more deeply planted, and you will become an initiated man if you do it. So the point of this talk is to talk about masculine psychology and these archetypes, which can seduce you into them, and you get stuck in those. And I'm cautioning you, don't do that. Do inner work and get unstuck. And you'll probably need help doing it, because they really get stuck pretty good, and all of a sudden you're into older age and your life is starting to ebb away in your 50s and 60s and 70s, and you're stuck in that, what we call constellated, what Jung said, constellated in a personality structure, and you can't get out. And that's a form of a prison, and you don't want to get stuck there. So please contemplate what I'm saying. And the point of the talks and the whole series is the cultivation of wisdom, and this one is on the masculine psychology and the archetypes. So thank you very much.